We are blessed to be with Isabel Wilkerson, who has blessed us in the most profound sense with an introduction to people who want us to know where we've come from so that we can, in my opinion, so that we can better that to which, the future that we are creating, that to which we are going. Bill?
There's a universal quality to this that goes beyond the migrant and the immigrant, which is a very important piece, and it goes to the human experience. In the World at War, there's a German
That
woman.
being a television program, series.
Well, it's narrated by Laurence Olivier, so it has to be the truth.
Has to be perfect.
And perfect and insightful. But there's a woman who is married to a German, lived in Germany during the war, and had grudgingly, because it was very dangerous and because nobody, including her family, didn't want her to do it, had allowed a Jewish family to spend 2 nights in her home, and she said 2 nights and no more, and they left on schedule and were subsequently caught and sent to, I think, Dachau, and died. And she said, with wrenching expression, that she realized when she heard they'd been captured that what Hitler had done is make her a murderer. And it's not only the white people who were complicitous in that, and some did feel that, but there were also a lot of black people who were complicitous in this. Not everyone is brave, and frankly, you shouldn't have to be brave to be a citizen of your country. But this is a deeply human story, and it challenges all of us. To do the best we can, as honestly as we can, and if necessary, as bravely as we can. And that is as much. And then I go back to George.
Mm-hmm. George,
because George got out.
Yeah.
And then George went back and went back and went back and went back. And
his job took him back.
His job took him back, but he was doing things on the railroad that not only could have, but did get him in, this close to back into the mess he had escaped
being
from.
dead again.
Yeah. Every time he went back south, he was in some ways risking his life on some level, because whenever they traveled back south, they had to take on the mantle, the mindset that they had left,
and the behaviors.
They had to. It's almost like they had to be bicultural.
And he wouldn't get off the train, which is a good thing. But he also, what he was willing to do once the Civil Rights Acts had were beginning to be passed.
Well, let her tell.
It was, again, the bravery is remarkable.
What he did was, after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, it meant that it opened up public conveyances to anyone. But because people had become so accustomed to living a certain way, people were afraid to act upon that. And there was still resistance in many parts of the South to permitting people to do that. And so on the train, it was his job to reposition people once they had passed from the North, and if they were returning to the South before the Civil Rights Act, he was to move them or make sure that they were in the Jim Crow car. Well, after the Civil Rights Act passed, they no longer had to do that. They could actually stay where they were.
Because it was the law of the land.
Because it was the law of the land at that point. But so many people were afraid to do that he had to actually very subtly, quietly, surreptitiously let them know that you no longer have to move to to a Jim Crow car.
Which is where the baggage and the dead...
But the conductor would come through and tell them to move.
And he would say, he would go up to them and he would say, now, very quietly, now, I'm going to tell you this.
George, not the conductor.
George would go up to the people and would say, now, I'm going to tell you this to let you know that because of the new law, you no longer have to go to the Jim Crow car. There is not that delineation anymore, and you can stay in this seat. But they were so accustomed to it that
don't tell.
But don't tell. He actually had to say, don't tell, because that could get me in trouble. And sometimes the people wouldn't understand, so they'd ask again, well, what did you say? What are you saying that I can do? Which would actually make it worse for him, because then he had to repeat it loudly. And he had to be very cautious and judicious as to who he would go up to and who he would not. And it turned out that many people were afraid to do it, and they never did leave.
It's important to say that Dr. King was murdered important to me anyway, before the Fair Housing Act was passed in
Absolutely.
'68, that he
Yes.
was dead before that happened.
He was.
It is important to me to say government matters. We have to have the laws of the land, and then people have to be able to enforce those laws. Is there a sense of, as Bill says,
Well, they
that
don't have to be able to. They have to enforce them. This is not optional. That's one of the problems that we are encountering in talking about these. The laws were there.
The laws were there. He had every right to do what he was doing, but there's human behavior and motivation that can supersede the law. And culture, human culture, and tradition. And the tradition is what he was fighting against. And he knew it was dangerous to even go up to them and say something. They could have turned him in. They could have gone up and said, well, this porter told me I didn't have to move. And then they'd say, well, which porter told you that? And who knows what might have happened to him, because whenever this was happening, he was heading south. He was always a little bit more concerned, clearly, when he was heading south, because he didn't have the same protections of the law that he might have had.
It is curious to me, having lived in the South many years now, the great return of many of you who are the children of the Great Migration. Let's close with that. What's going on here that these people who gave their whole lives to get out of here, their children and their grandchildren, rather like the children and grandchildren of slaves who went north, are coming south again? I mean, there's this... What is this?
I think it shows that the country in some ways is more alike than it is different. And the people who are coming back, it's again that search for the warmth of other suns. Maybe we'll try again. Let's try this again. It's changed. The laws have now taken hold. The schools are now integrated. Also, there's a search to try to understand the culture from which they came. There's a searching to understand where is it that we are from? What is the ancestry and where did we learn to speak this way, eat this way, play the music and listen to the music? There's a curiosity. Also, it's a curiosity and an interest and a longing for a place, because the African American history can only sort of stops at slavery. So this is in some ways the old country. This is the motherland for African Americans who do not have that direct connection to the real motherland of Africa.
Which is, of course, that from which we all come. We are all black since we all came out of Africa.
I don't want this opportunity to end without a brief overview that you do a wonderful job of the mythology surrounding the urban ghettos. It's complex, but it turns out most of what we think to be the case, as is typically the case, isn't the case. What's the true story about urban?
The reality is that much of the newer literature that's really looked deep into the census numbers and the economics of what happened with these people show that the majority of the people who left, first of all, you have to be extremely motivated to leave the only place you've ever known for a place you've never seen in hopes that it will be better. That alone makes you different from the people who stay. Not better, just different. And so they were highly motivated. It turned out that they were more likely to be married than not. It turned out that they were more likely to remain married once they got to the North than not. It turned out that, like many immigrants, they worked more than one job. You may find that for example, in the case of Pershing, Dr. Foster, look at what he had to do in order to just find work as a doctor. He knocked on doors, he went to churches, he did everything he could to try to find work, and ultimately became a great success financially. Ida Mae did all kinds of things before she was able to finally find the job at the hospital. Her husband,
a blue-collar job.
Yes, her husband hauled ice. He did all kinds of things in order before he found the job at Campbell Soup. They doubled up with other people, stayed with relatives, as many immigrants do. So it turned out that their behavior was much like that of other immigrants who come from far away with very little in their pocket, turn to the people that are around them, are sort of wary about how far they'll go. Some of them were even afraid to even get on the train and sit in the front because they were so accustomed to being in the back. So there's a wariness to that. But there's something different about people who are willing to leave. And so a lot of the assumptions that we currently have about what happens to people when they get there, or to this particular group, turned out to be quite different. They ended up being more likely to be raising their children in two-parent households. They were much more likely to, as I said, to remain married. They actually ended up making more money per capita, not lots of money, but we mean just, we're saying compared to the northern blacks who were there already, which were small in number to begin with, they ended up making more money because they often worked extra jobs, they worked longer hours, and that in some ways was the transporting of the culture of the South. They were accustomed to working 12, 14-hour days for $1 or less, or maybe nothing in the bruising sun. This was in some ways a relief from having to do that kind of backbreaking work.
And what was different was the fertility rate.
The fertility rate was astounding.
I had never heard these numbers.
I had never, that was again Stanley Lieberson, who did a seminal work on the immigrants versus African Americans from the South, and he's now at Harvard, and that research was essential to my being able to understand better the reality. Which showed that African Americans, when they got to the North, converging with European immigrants from Poland, from Hungary, from Czechoslovakia, from Russia, from Italy, I looked at the numbers, the birth rates for the women in those groups. I was astonished, stunned. I had to look at it 3 times to make sure I was reading it correctly. The African American women who had come from the South, they were not at the top, as might have been expected. They were not in the middle. They actually had the lowest birth rate of all of those groups of women. Unbelievable.
So where did the welfare queen, drug king, gang member, where did all the ugliness that the media have shoved down our throats as being the black in the ghetto stuff, where'd that come from?
I think that what people end up doing in the work of journalism is to look for the exception that is the more dramatic story to tell.
It bleeds, it leads?
Exactly. And it was so much easier to see. It's visible. I mean, it's visible if people are hanging on the street and they're selling drugs. It's very visible, and so you're going to go to that. So that I often describe people like Ida Mae as the quiet children in the classroom. The majority of children in a classroom are going to be well behaved and do their work. There will be the people who are going to be, the ne'er-do-wells and the poorly behaved.
Well, and there is Ronald Reagan starting his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where 3 civil rights workers had been murdered in the summer of 60.
It was politically expedient to maintain
politically
those
expedient, and they were being they were available because they were right there in the cities, and if you wanted to see that, that's what you could see. But by looking at those people, you're missing the majority. You're missing the bigger story of the average people, the majority of people who are going out there, working really hard jobs, working multiple jobs, trying to save up to get a house and having trouble, rocks thrown through their window, the neighborhood emptying out of the people who you thought you might have gotten to know, of the people who are having trouble living in the neighborhoods where they're not getting protected from this minority of people who are selling drugs and prostitution. I mean, if Ida Mae was ending up in a neighborhood where she went every month to her neighborhood community meeting in order to get the police to do things, and they were afraid actually even to report. When they put in their reports about what they saw, they never put their names on them.
Okay, let's go.
It also was a pressure cooker.
You bet.
I mean, the geographic bounds and the economic constraints created a pressure cooker. I mean, the people could not get out. They could not get jobs. They couldn't move out of the neighborhood.
They couldn't move out of the neighborhood.
There was no option in that. And this went on for decades. And it's still a challenge.
It's still a challenge.
Well, there are so many things about which I want to speak. The fact that for 40 years in America, on average, 4 people were burned alive or hung every week. On and on and on and on.
Every 3.5 days.
That's so beyond appalling, there are no words for it. However, I like to close on a more hopeful, your word note. Ida Mae was able, toward the end of her life, to do something quite amazing, which takes us from today forward, and that was?
She was one of the first people to vote for Barack Obama.
Isabel Wilkerson has now extended her narrative with a new book, Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. With this new book, she shows that, in her words, the hierarchy of caste is not about feelings or morality. It is about power. Which groups have it and which do not. Justice for all is a long-standing and unfulfilled promise of the American experiment. Justice is how power is constrained. Peace without justice is tyranny, and that is not acceptable. We thank Miss Wilkerson for collecting, distilling, and sharing the narratives which show us a path to justice for all. I'm Paula Gordon. I wish you well.
I'm proud of all my friends, 'cause life ain't always easy, but they keep holding on. I'm proud of all my friends, 'cause they keep believing that the best is yet to come.